presenting with Peter and Tucker, and we're presenting on government debts and deficits. When government spends more than it collects in taxes as a budget deficit, this is financed by borrowing from either the private sector or from foreign governments. And when this borrowing accumulates, it is considered to be government debt. A government deficit is the difference between what a government takes in from taxes and other revenues and what the government spends, and this metric is calculated every year. When government spending is higher than taxes, there's a budget deficit, and this increases national debt. And when government spending is less than taxes, it is considered a budget surplus, and this can decrease national debt because the government, when they have more money, they don't necessarily have to pay back this debt. So the current debt of the United States federal government is not super high, but it is higher than average compared to other countries, and also the historical average of the United States government debt. The debt to GDP ratio rose pretty significantly during the Great Depression, Great Recession, Great Depression, all the wars in U.S. history, because automatic stabilizers and discretionary fiscal actions increased the government's budget deficit. Standard measures of budget deficit are imperfect measures of fiscal policy because they do not correct for the effects of inflation. They do not offset changes in government liabilities with changes in government assets. They omit some liabilities altogether, and they do not correct for the effects of the business cycle properly.
According to the traditional view of government debt, a debt-financed tax cuts stimulates consumer spending and lowers national saving. This increase in consumer spending leads to greater aggregate demand and higher income in the short run, but it leads to a lower capital stock and lower income in the long run. According to the Ricardian view of government debt, a debt-financed tax cut does not stimulate consumer spending because it does not raise consumers' overall resources. It merely reschedules taxes from the present to the future. The debate between the traditional and Ricardian views of government debt is ultimately a debate over how consumers behave. Are consumers rationally forward-looking or short-sighted? Do they face binding borrowing constraints? Are they economically linked to future generations through altruistic bequests? Economists' views of government debt hinge on their answers to these questions.
All right, most economists opposed a strict rule of requiring a balanced budget. A budget deficit can sometimes be justified on the basis of short-run stabilization, tax smoothing, or intergenerational redistribution of the tax burden. Furthermore, government debt can potentially have other effects. Large government debt or budget deficits may encourage excessive monetary expansion and therefore lead to greater inflation. The possibility of running budget deficits may encourage politicians to unduly burden future generations when setting government spending and taxes. Also, a high level of government debt may increase the risk of capital flight and diminish a nation's influence around the world. Economists differ on which of these effects they consider most important.